I wanted your advice.
You have it.
Yes, you see, I omitted the sidelight. You do want to hear the case for both sides, don't you?
Well, not particularly.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today I'm joined by Ola Sars, who is the founder and CEO of Soundtrack Your Brand, which is the world's fastest growing music platform for B2B. And before Soundtrack, Ola was the co-founder and chief operating officer of Beats Music, which was acquired by Apple. Welcome to our show today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So I want to go way back to 2007, 2008, when music was starting to go digital. And I guess that led you to start your first music company called Tonium. And out of that, you guys built the world's first pocket-sized DJ system called Pacemaker. Can you give us a little bit of background, please?
Sure. I mean, that's a long time ago, and it's actually before the App Store was launched. So believe it or not, it's crazy to think about the notion that we were thinking about the digitization of music. But the short Swedish story is that I was doing something else in my life that I was not very happy with, working in some private equity, working some management consulting, working in some big corps. I wanted to move into the music industry out of personal drive and a passion, and I had a lot of friends who made a living in the music space. So with that emotional drive, I started looking for the opportunity to move into the industry. And with my more kind of sensible, logical part of the brain, I saw a market that was changing right in front of us in terms of consumption was going digital right in front of us. Distribution was going digital right in front of us, and production was going digital right in front of us. But it was just in the beginning of kind of the transformation of the whole music industry, which we now all know has changed the whole model. And basically, I made a bet that consumption would solve itself through mobile and through distribution and through networks and so forth. I made a assumption that production was very complex and very niche. So that's probably nothing to kind of dive into directly. But there was something in between in terms of the distribution and the notion that in a digitized market, or a market of abundance, if you may, where all the music in the world would be available anywhere, anytime at your fingertips. That's a very interesting context. And the biggest challenge in that context, or in that market reality, was obviously who figures out what music to deliver to you at that specific point, who actually helps you filter out in real time that amazing experience of the arts. So and some people call it curation, some people call it music intelligence and so forth. But I started looking at that area and understood that would be a very interesting area to be active within. And there we went into our first venture, trying to create the first music recommendation engine. That's actually what Pacemaker and Tonium was all about. But we were a bit too early. We looked at the market. AI wasn't that advanced at that time, specifically not within music. But we did look at the DJs of the world, the selectors of music, the humans that were actually very active in picking out the right music for the right people in the right context. So we thought that first venture that we would build, that I started, Tonium, we would connect to the DJs of the world, extract their music intelligence, and turn that into a recommendation engine to create a better experience for consumers in a digitized future. So that was my first venture, Tonium, which we set out to do. And it didn't turn out like we planned, for sure.
Well, I want to just comment on something, which is that, when we think about artificial intelligence, people, I think, sometimes forget that there are human components to it. It's really the humans that actually create the
Yes.
actual artificial intelligence. And what you're talking about, which predates a lot of the ML and the deep learning that's happening today, is that the human computation is very powerful. The DJs actually are very powerful curators of music, and their preferences and tastes are actually heightened relative to, let's say, just average consumers, listeners of music. So I think that was very, very spot on, very interesting. Uh, Going a little bit, forward, if you could talk a little bit about how you and Jamie and Dr. Dre worked together to turn Let's Mix to Beats into the Beats music platform.
Right. So I'll fast track towards that experience, 2007, when I jumped in and we built the Tonium platform. And the first product platform that we released was called Pacemaker. And we were actually forced to build hardware, develop a hardware platform to follow our ambition to build this recommendation engine, because there was no efficient software distribution or metadata extraction methods to connect to the DJs of the world, because that was the first step in this vision, connecting with the DJs, extracting their knowledge. So we built a hardware called Pacemaker DJ, which was full DJ set at the size of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, so anyone could buy it. So we were democratizing DJing, but it's basically being creative with music and playing around with music and kind of extracting the creativity of what song comes next and what song comes in the context of what song. So when we built Pacemaker, we built a beautiful Swedish high-end hardware, launched in 20 markets, raised $20 million at that point in time. That was a lot of money for a small tech startup, specifically in Sweden. And we were successful in creating a very interesting thesis and idea around this and a beautiful hardware. And at that point, Jimmy and Dre were starting off with Beats by Dre. They were starting off with the headphone business, as we all remember how they came to the market, right? They started looking at alternative ways of building a business around their position in the music industry, when obviously the music industry was in a very bad spot back then in 2010. It was getting significantly torpedoed by file sharing and so forth. So they started a hardware company, but Beats by Dre was a bigger ambition. Obviously, it was an ambition to build the leading brand, the mainstream music leading brand in the US and then globally, and they started doing that through building hardware, the headphones. And now they saw a potential expansion of that hardware business with our creative hardware Pacemaker. So they actually tried to acquire the company from me, and I actually tried to broker that deal at that point to acquire the full software and the hardware company, Tony and Pacemaker. But we weren't able to broker the deal because actually Pacemaker was in the mid-page of Wired magazine. We were all over. Everyone was thinking about our interesting technology. So our investors obviously thought that we were going to have a shot at being the new Apple, which they should, and so did I. But I really understood the power that these people would bring to the company, but I was not able to bring them in at that point. Post Tony and Pacemaker and us actually failing, we weren't able to survive with building hardware as a startup. And I learned that the hard way, obviously, that trying to reiterate and develop an R&D hardware and software at the same time is not easy, specifically not as a startup in a very early phase. So we crashed the bigger ambition with Tonium, but I acquired the online platform of that business, and I branded that Let's Mix, and it was actually an upload and share platform for DJ mixes. So it was just basically the same vision with Pacemaker, but I took away the hardware and the complexities of that, and it became a very attractive music service where people would follow DJs, and it kind of fulfilled my vision with creating a taste exchange market where DJs, the tastemakers of the world, would access the taste takers of the world in a fun and interesting way, and supplying curation. So at that point, I had acquired that company myself when we were forced to give up on the bigger hardware ambition. So I had a second chance, spoke to Jimmy and Dre again, and they were obviously progressing their ambition of moving Beats from just a hardware company to becoming a music service, and becoming a music service with a clear differentiation to my other Swedish friends, Daniel and Martin, who were building Spotify at that time, very early focusing on AI and kind of music intelligence and music recommendation driven by machines. Whereas Jimmy had a very human approach to it, where he wanted to build a competitor, Beats Music, that we established on that vision, that was driven by human curation and editorial more. So there were two extremes: Spotify with the robot, and Jimmy's and my ambition to build the human kind of driven. And obviously the end result, as we see today, is something in between.
Mm-hmm.
So Let's Mix was very quickly acquired and transferred into Beats Music. I actually registered the Beats Music brand myself the first time in Sweden as a stealth project, and there we were, running towards trying to beat Spotify.
All right, so let's just try and accelerate this a little bit and bring us up to the current with Soundtrack, your brand. Tell us what it is and how you guys are providing the background music streaming service with curated background soundtrack for business use.
So, coming out of Beats after a very rocky ride, but obviously finishing off with a pretty nice ending, transferring that into Apple and Apple Music, moving back to Sweden for personal reasons. Very tired of sitting on a plane for 250 days a year and so forth. So thinking about what to do next. What I had heard when I was out, building a consumer service, was multiple brands approaching us, talking about how do we relate to music streaming? How do we relate to music as an opportunity to expand the customer experience and maybe even drive behavior, maybe even, have people buy more, or people stay longer, or people move faster, or people feel more chilled out, and so forth. And there was this very intriguing expansion of music and the opportunity of kind of the benefit of music, the kind of neuroscientific perspective of how music affects our brain and in an interesting way. So I figured that was the interesting intellectual part, but then on the very practical side, what I saw was there was no streaming services for businesses. So it was a very basic, logical transition from what I've learned in building B2C services and building the first B2B service for music. And obviously the use case is completely different for a company or a brand using music. You're broadcasting music to multiple people, maybe in a commercial sensitive context, and you're maybe in 20 markets at the same time, and you might be lunch in Chicago and dinner in Stockholm and so forth. So a very fun challenge to kind of take the streaming market into the B2B market. It's also very intriguing for the music industry because it creates incremental growth on the macro of streaming. So I was, for the first time, very well received at the labels and the publishers, and 9,000 direct deals later and a couple of flights more, here we are with 2018 rolling out the world's first B2B service for music. And we're in 73 markets with 50 million tracks. And as you probably saw, we just signed the final deal with Universal the other week as the first Universal deal for B2B music.
So I think, if we were to kind of analyze this from a case study, it's interesting because you not only helped pioneer this space, but saw the strategic market gap and filled it, which frankly wasn't being addressed by anyone else, which is very fascinating because I think a lot of the players were so, fanatically focused on the consumer side. So what do you feel like are some of the key kind of success factors that's helped you guys to be such a fast growing B2B streaming service provider?
Well, I would say it's still very early for Soundtrack. We're not only providing a service that I can explain to anyone. There's music in restaurants, right? There's music in retail. There's music in train stations. We provide the streaming solution for that. So it's a very easy business to explain. And you would ask, let's just take one of our clients, Joe and the Juice, which is a Danish juice chain. They're in the US now as well, so you probably know of them. They're pretty cool. They're growing extremely fast, but they basically run all of their music, which is core for their strategy, with one guy out of Copenhagen worldwide at around 1,000 juice bars. So we have centralized the whole system. They know exactly what experience they're delivering, and Düsseldorf, Berlin, Stockholm, London, Manchester, Chicago, New York, LA, San Francisco, and they're very specific of what type of experience they want to deliver at what time of day and what geography. But they're managing it through one person in Copenhagen. So we're solving a significant problem in terms of efficiency and distribution. We are digitizing distribution for businesses. Music, previously they would send CDs, believe it or not, they were actually on CD. They were using satellite feeds that are analog in terms of they're sounding like a radio station. You can't control it in real time. And we're offering them the benefit of technology, meaning that they could actually start affecting the experience in real time. If there's a lot of people in the store, maybe volume should go up a little bit because the body absorbs decibel. If there's, a lot of, people coming in that are young, coming from a college or something, then they adjust the experience towards them in order to drive a certain behavior. If it's raining outside, they might actually have a call to our API and adjust the soundscape. So all of a sudden they get this technology real-time benefit as well, and it becomes a part of kind of digitizing the physical experience with music, which is a very, it provides a very low marginal cost to affect an experience in real time. So there's something more than just the music and the beauty of that. There's technology, and then there's the next step of retail as well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I'm looking at it from the perspective of smart buildings, smart cities, right? Yeah. Because it's about how do you actually sensorize the movements and the kinds of demographics and the interaction of groups, because we're not talking about individuals where right. Individuals are clicking through and selecting certain songs or artists. We're talking about externalizing some of these sensors so that you can understand the feel of the crowd and the needs of the crowd. Right. Yeah, so it's very interesting to have that bilateral input, because obviously the music, the ambience is affecting the mood and the psyche and the cognitive load of the listeners, but you're also picking up things from the environment as well as the crowd to be as personalized, mass personalized as possible. So it's very, very interesting. Very interesting. And I think the thing that actually really kind of sticks out in my mind is how you've been at the forefront of all these major pioneering innovations. I mean, truly. Just incredible. And I think you've focused primarily really on kind of the creation and distribution side. And you also mentioned that now you guys are at a point where you've kind of merged the human computation with the artificial intelligence, and then, of course, the sensor capability, the Internet of Things. Can you talk a little bit about what's next? Because you say you guys are just getting started. And then the last question I want to ask, if we have time, is where is this going? Because clearly you have a really great vantage point.
Well, I think being early is from a market perspective and market penetration perspective. On a product side and technology side, we are fairly sophisticated. I would say we have a very sophisticated team. We have our own approach to our AI and our ML logic. We've actually developed our own IP around how do brands think about music, and how do you filter music based on how brands think about music and meeting a specific target group. So we've trained our machines to analyze all the music in the world with new parameters. Like, for example, you can choose, I want elegant house that's progressive from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s with English vocals only at 128 BPM. Boom, that's what I want. So all of a sudden you see a whole new way of carving music based on more what you called kind of the social context or the social use case. So we're at a very advanced level there. Where are we going next? To your question is, how do you commercialize that technology and that advantage into a market that has not been trained to buy in a very sophisticated way yet? So I think that's kind of what's next, is bridging the gap between the small cafe owner in Brooklyn or the sophisticated buyer as Joe and the Juice, on really kind of extracting the value from our service, maybe all the way to actually showing them that they can increase sales. And if we kind of break that code, then obviously this is not a music startup anymore. It's something else. And just for a comment, which is interesting, is that we've actually done the world's biggest field study together with a very big hamburger chain out of Chicago that everyone knows about, where we did a massive Latin Square experiment with our model, and we proved that 9% effect on top line versus current music solution, and applying our AI to their musical experience. But having said that, I can't look another business owner in the eye and say, I guarantee you 9%, uptake on your top line. So I think that's next for us, like really, unlocking the value of this, interesting kind of philosophical discussion that we're having, that anyone can understand. Great music, I'll buy another beer, but how do you scale that? And how do you take it all the way to all the businesses in the world and help them drive their business? I think that's when this company will become the diamond that I want it to be.
I am profoundly impressed by your insight. I think, sometimes we think of music as something that kind of imbues and sets our mood, when in fact it's another dimension of storytelling. And we know from sales perspective or methodologies that storytelling is effective, whether we're talking about politics or sales, at conversion. And it's interesting to put in that paradigm of quantitative, empirically driven, top line growth opportunity as music, as a way to storytell, to influence. That's very, very powerful. And I've not quite heard it in that phrase, so it's very intriguing. Where do you feel that things are going to go in terms of the music industry, both on the B2B side, but also on the consumer side?
Well, I think the key of building a music startup, which I've obviously failed and succeeded within. So I've done a lot of mistakes, and in this industry, people tend to underestimate the complexity of it. So I think it's really hard building music startups. And I've learned that the hard way. So I think I have an advantage of understanding the music industry and talking to them about the benefits of progressing into the future. Where can we take this? How can we grow? And I mean, we did a pretty good job on the consumer side together with my fellow Swedes at Spotify to kind of move the market, right? And now we're looking at Goldman Sachs showing us 2020, 2030, $70 billion market becoming $140 billion market. I mean, the music industry doesn't believe it where they are right now. And that's mainly fueled by streaming and the growth of the streaming model. So we're in a good spot to talk to the music industry about the next step. And I think the beauty of B2B is it's such a no-brainer in terms of, okay, what's next? We've discounted the consumer growth. Where are we going to look? Okay, we got TikTok and Thriller and those guys. That's incremental, interesting. But here's, the one that everyone can understand. Oh yeah, there's a B2B market, and how does that work? And he's charging $30 a subscription, not $6. And that means that I'm going to get 6 to 10x from every subscription. And, if Starbucks is selling more coffee music, I don't think they're going to have a problem paying more. And then the legacy markets are already, proven that businesses are prepared to pay, $30 or something for the subscription. So I think to your question about the music industry, I think they're looking for the next big thing, even though they have a very interesting trajectory. And there's a lot of alternatives, but I have a very low hanging fruit in that context. And I'm unlocking value, and they love someone telling them that they're going to charge more for their art. Wouldn't you, if you own it? So, I mean, everyone's driven by that, right? So I think it's going to be interesting, obviously being biased, but we're at a very interesting inflection point in our business where we just, signed a big one, and that kind of puts a stamp on our model.
Yeah. So on that note, I think it's so interesting because when you were beginning, you mentioned, file sharing and issues around the infringement of copyright and royalties with music. And here we're actually giving back the power and the opportunities for multiples back to not only the originators, but also the entire ecosystem. So with that, I've been joined by Ola Sars, who is the CEO of Soundtrack, your brand. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.